doctors, local political leaders, letting the democracy that's always allowed our nation to thrive, to put the best ideas forward so states can decide for themselves.
To the world of business.
My sense is that we're headed toward a recession. Until just recently, Congress, appropriated money in billions. When the word trillions didn't exist.
This is Balance of Power with David Weston.
World headquarters in New York to our television and radio audiences worldwide. Welcome to Balance of Power. It's 15 days now until those midterm elections, and last night we had a couple of really important debates, one of them here in New York State for the governor's race, and then, of course, in the all-important Senate race in Pennsylvania. We had that debate as well, and to bring us up to speed on exactly what we learned and maybe didn't learn, we welcome now Washington correspondent Joe Matthews, host of Sound On weekdays on Bloomberg Radio, normally based in Washington, but we're delighted to have Joe right here with us in New York today. Joe, welcome. Good to have you.
Good to see you, David.
So what did we learn from that debate between Fetterman and Oz?
Well, this is likely the closest Senate race in the country. This is the race that may well decide the balance of power here in the United States Senate. And a lot of people are asking this morning, David, why the Fetterman campaign allowed their candidate to get into this vulnerable situation, knowing, of course, that he had a stroke back in May, and this issue of health has been one on the campaign ever since. You heard him mention the elephant in the room. That was part of his opening statement. But we had a couple of large screens over the moderators just to give you a sense of what the room looked like, David, so he could use closed captioning. That resulted in some delays in his answers, and he did have trouble articulating his answers in some cases. Listen, as he was asked about his stand on fracking.
I do support fracking, and I support fracking, and I do support fracking.
It's a particularly sensitive issue in his district, and it's one that people were actually very curious about as he's been on both sides of this issue, publicly speaking. Last night, some had trouble understanding exactly what he meant by that. Now, Dr. Oz, of course, he had his own issues, but remember, he is a professional television personality, played well in front of the cameras, he spoke quickly. He had some trouble articulating his views on abortion, for instance, when he said it was, the quote was, between a woman, her doctor, and local political leaders. That's not exactly as he might have meant it, but the race is too close to call here. They're within a point, David, and this is a fascinating situation. More than 630,000 people in Pennsylvania have voted early and can't change their mind based on what they saw last night.
Well, and that's the question, Joe. How much difference does a bit like this make, do we think?
Well, we have a lot of questions about, for instance, this debate or the one in Georgia where Herschel Walker obviously had some issues. He pulled a badge out, for crying out loud, and we didn't really see much of a change in the numbers following that.
I'm not sure it was a real badge.
No, about that. He said it was legit, but I don't know whether.
Okay, thank you so much to Bloomberg Joe Matthews. You can catch him at 5 o'clock this afternoon on Bloomberg Radio on Sound On. And now we're going to talk to one of those who is running in this race right now, and she is Representative Haley Stevens, Democrat of Michigan. So, Congresswoman, thank you so much for being with us. As I say, you've got your own race you're running, but give us your perspective from Michigan about what this midterm election is looking like.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of energy right now here in Michigan. Governor Gretchen Whitmer just had her second debate last night. You heard from her energy, optimism, and enthusiasm for the future. We've got semiconductor investments coming here to this state, supply chains expanding, people investing, our workforce is moving, our kids are back at school. We beat tough times, and we're continuing to lead the way, particularly on the zero emissions front, David, with electric vehicle technology as well as hydrogen that's coming through here as well.
Congressman, there's no question Congress got a lot done. Democrats got a lot done in Congress, some of which you just referred to, some of the investments, for example, in semiconductors and in infrastructure. At the same time, we do have an issue with inflation in the country. And just yesterday, we were talking to Jared Bernstein from the White House. And when asked about the case for Democrats in this midterm, he said basically, we have a lot of jobs. Do jobs beat inflation as an issue in Michigan right now?
Well, look, we can't underestimate the global ramifications of inflation and what everyday Michiganders, Americans are experiencing at the gas pump, at the grocery store. We obviously got that Inflation Reduction Act done, some of the initial steps that need to tackle price pressures that people are facing. But I want to be very clear. there are those of us who are going to move forward to fund the government. And I just think back to a few years ago when I joined Congress in the middle of the longest government shutdown that I inherited from the previous Congress that was Republican run, longest government shutdown in history, costing our economy $11 billion. That's the question that we need to be asking right now. Are you paying lip service to some of the economic challenges we are facing, or are you offering solutions? And Haley Stevens, my sleeves are rolled up. I meet every single day with our manufacturers, going to visit one today, as a matter of fact, later this afternoon. David, wish I could bring you along with me. They're doing some really interesting things on the hydrogen front. But I'll tell you this, you're either offering solutions or you're complaining. We, as a Democratic majority, have been offering those solutions.
Well, I'd like to be back in my home state with you. I'd love to go see that hydrogen plant. But let me actually offer up what I think a lot of Republicans are saying in terms of solutions, which is less spending, less taxes, and less regulation, and that is a way to fight inflation. What is your response to that? It's not entirely implausible.
Yeah, well, look, we had a tax bill that came down in 2017, and it saddled our middle class with lack of solutions, and certainly squeezed our teachers and our municipalities, as well as sometimes even fire and police. I got into Congress, and every community I talked to said that they were looking for public works employees, that they were looking for fire and police because their bottom line had been squeezed. And there's a fine balance, as someone who manages the taxpayer dollar, passing a federal budget, we've got to use those taxpayer dollars effectively for proven outcomes. That's investing in public education, which Governor Gretchen Whitmer has done, which House Democrats did with the rescue bill, getting our kids back to schools. That constantly pays dividends to our Treasury, and we need a plan for the future, investing in high skills, workforce development, making sure that we have school safety so that everyone can succeed on equal ground. And those are things, David, I would never bet against. And yet, time and time again, from the other side of the aisle, it's not real solutions. It's not proven strategies. It's just political gamesmanship.
Congressman, there's another item on the agenda on the ballot this coming midterm election, beyond the candidates, and that, of course, in Michigan is specifically abortion. That was something that Governor Whitmer and her opponent addressed in that debate last night. Could you give us your sense about whether the fact that abortion will be on the ballot in Michigan might affect voter turnout?
Well, I certainly am seeing a lot of energized individuals, men and women alike, people who are participating in events to pass that, what we're calling Prop 3, that's Proposal 3 on our ballot to codify abortion rights into our state constitution. And speaking of which, David, abortion rights are economic rights. And so you can't be, railing for people's economic future without necessarily saying that women have the right to make their own healthcare decisions. We're still in the middle of an ongoing pandemic, which we are managing. It is not 2020. We're proud of our progress. But certainly what we got with the Dobbs decision was another major healthcare disruption. Talk to our providers, talk to our doctors, talk to people who are pulling their hair off, thinking that they might be sued, or, if Gretchen Whitmer's opponent wins, prosecuted as just a result of providing everyday care. So I'm optimistic about this proposal. I know that people are energized on both sides, but I think common sense is going to prevail, and we're going to stick with the 50-year tradition that we had with Roe v. Wade, personal, private healthcare decisions between a woman, her family, and her doctor.
And finally, Congresswoman, to go back to inflation for a moment, the White House has by and large said that's up to the Fed. They're independent. The Fed is independent. At the same time, we had one of your fellow Democrats, Sherrod Brown, yesterday, Senator from Ohio, write a letter to Jay Powell, really questioning the raising of rates to the degree they are to try to fight that inflation. Where are you on that subject? Do you think the Fed is doing the right thing?
Well, I certainly respect the autonomy that the Federal Reserve has in recognizing some of the steps that they have taken to ease the inflationary pressures that have come down from global considerations. I have been battling Vladimir Putin since I got into Congress because he detained and now has falsely imprisoned my constituent Paul Whelan, now alongside Brittany Griner, 2 Americans who deserve to come home and deserve to be freed. And now we have this war that he has started that is contributing to rising prices and energy considerations. And I would just say this about the Federal Reserve. I respect the process. As someone who worked alongside Sherrod Brown on the U.S. Auto Rescue, he definitely knows how to